Alright, let's talk about Dungeon Painter Studio. It's a tool developed by pyromancers. You can find them at pyromancers.com, and this app is available on the Steam store. So I'm going to go through a tutorial of the different tools and options available within Dungeon Painter Studio Legacy Edition. You can see I already have some stuff here on the screen so that I can manipulate it and talk about each of the tools. Alright, so let's just quickly go over some of the interface design here. You see our various control options at the top here for moving and manipulating objects, creating grounds and floors, putting up walls, putting in objects, creating some lines and text, tokens, and this templates option. And then at the bottom you have the various things that you can put onto the map, which is contextual based on whether you're in ground options, wall options, or object options. And then everything you put on the screen within your workspace in the middle here will have an item listed here on the right. And here you can turn off your stick to grid, your allow half, which is what allows sticking halfway between the grid, your zoom options, layers, the items within the layers, putting effects on those layers, and back in grid options, and then your layer interaction options, grouping layers, ungrouping them, moving objects from the top to the bottom of the layer, copy paste, undoing what you did, redo button, and cutting objects, and removing objects. The remove button works the same way as highlighting an item and pressing the delete key. Alright, let's just go through these options one step at a time. Top under controls, you've got move, which is pretty simple. Use that to select an object on the screen and move it. You've got your select tool, which lets you select one or more objects by dragging over top of them. And then you can manipulate all of those objects. So we go back to move and move them all around. Our next tool is rotate. Click that, and then we can rotate everything. The way the rotate tool works in Dungeon Painter Studio is it rotates everything around this control point. We can also move this control point to another spot and then rotate. So put the control point way over here and everything will still rotate around that control point. We can select just one thing here, rotate it. So, pretty straightforward. And the next tool we have here is our scale tool. So the scale tool works differently for objects found in the objects tool than it does for items created using the ground tool. So if we go to objects, this scale button doesn't actually do anything to this bed. But if we select this ground object and click scale, we can use these buttons to scale the ground up and down. But we can also get the same effect just by clicking one of these control points and dragging it. You can see I still have this stick to grid on, so I'm just dragging it to locked grid points, which you can turn that off, and then you can drag it anywhere without locking it. more often than not, I work with the stick to grid turned on and the allow half turned on. Alright, so those are your basic controls. Next we have the grounds and floors. So you can put a rectangle floor. I'll go ahead and grab this hand painted green floor here and drag and put this little leafy bit of floor there. So, nice simple rectangle tool, or we could do it as an ellipse, or a polygon, which has some of its own unique options here. The rectangle and the ellipse don't really have much special there. Polygon, we'll leave it as the default, and we'll just do a let's drag over here, just do a simple click polygon, which you can either click all the way back to the beginning point and it will finish the polygon, or if you draw part of it and click the enter key, it will also finish the polygon for you. Now let's try a polygon with is jagged checked. You'll see it creates jagged edges around your polygon, which is pretty cool. And we can adjust the segment length. Let's try a really long segment length. See the difference in how jagged the lines are with the longer segment length. And this amplitude setting. You can kind of see the difference in the polygon that I'm drawing right now. If I drag and move this, it seemed to be showing for a moment. Let's go select this polygon, and over here on the right we click edit, and then we'll readjust this so you can see what the amplitude is actually doing to it. Changing the segment length, telling it whether or not to be jagged. And once you've got those settings the way you want, click OK, and there's your polygon tool. You get all kinds of different shapes out of that. You can also create a puddle. Let's maybe we should use some water for the puddle. Let's create a little puddle here. Puddle clicks just like the polygon, but it doesn't leave jagged edges. It leaves a more smooth rounded edges, or set of rounded edges, which we can readjust a blur level. Get it really blurry or not, and adjust a smoothness level. So let's make it not blurry at all. Zoom in and adjust the smoothness. See right there in that top corner, it adjusts how rounded the curves are. Make it really, really blurry with no smoothness. You can't really see too well that it's a point with the blur on. But there we go. See? That's the puddle tool. And then the terrain tool is it's more like a paintbrush. So with terrain tool you have your paintbrush sizes here. And you click what you want to paint with. And then you drag with your mouse button held down and you paint. The biggest difference here with the painted one is when you edit it, you don't have the same options. Here you have the ability to scale the texture on the paint, rotating the texture, and shifting the texture. Actually, don't remember these options being here the last time I really delved into making a map, so it's a pretty neat option. Alright, so that's our ground tools. Then we have our wall tools. It's pretty simple. Click straight wall. I like the painted walls better than the main walls. So I'll zoom in, create a simple straight wall. But you can adjust the thickness of the wall, make it really, really thick. The thing that's not really great in Dungeon Painter Studio when you make the walls thicker is it doesn't really make the texture bigger, it sort of just copies the texture over and over again to fill in that space. I mean, this looks fine right now, but as you play around with some effects later on, you might see that it doesn't necessarily look the greatest, and it zooms in on the texture a lot, causing blurrier end results. We've got our, reset the thickness down to 1. We've got our polygon walls. Use those a lot. Much like with the polygon floor, if you click all the way back to your start point, it will close the polygon for you. This one, if you just hit enter, it won't reconnect the polygon, but it will finish it. And got a nice little arc tool here, so you can create click a start point, click the end point, and then you can move your mouse until you have the circle or semicircle arc wall that you want. Left click or press enter to finish. And then you've got a cool circle that can be a little bit harder to draw on some of these apps. And that's your walls. Pretty easy. This next set over here are your objects. So click on your objects. Got some bats. Got some beds, barrels, just place objects. Objects can be rotated or placed at these set rotations. Select random angle, so it just sets them at random. Do a custom angle, which is a little harder to manipulate because you have to manipulate this before you put the object on the screen. The angle can be manipulated after the fact when you edit the object. You flip vertical, flip horizontal, and here's where you scale these objects. Rather than using this scale tool, you use this one to scale these up and down. Put a giant bed here, and you'll see the scale automatically jumps back to its original scale, which is the 100.001 point on the scale. Or you can set a scale and lock the scale, and then it will keep that scale until you unlock the scale. I don't recall what the Z-sort does. I will update the video at some point or put a notation in the description describing what the Z-sort button's for. I've made a lot of maps using this program, and I've never really found the need for this little button. And then next we've got our lines and text tool. So I'm going to zoom out and move over here. This one we can pick a line thickness, pick what color we want the line to be, how transparent we want the line to be, and click and draw a line. These lines are treated a little differently than the walls, and it's just a simple color line. Interestingly, the transparency slider is all the way to the left is transparent and all the way to the right is solid. There's a spline tool, which works much like the line tool, but creates splines, your bendable lines. What would have been nice is the addition of splines within the wall tool, so you can spline a texture like some of the other competitors to Dungeon Painter Studio can do. And then you've got a simple text tool where you can pick your font. I'll just leave this on the default font. Pick a dark color for the text. Go ahead and add my text here. Pick where you want to put that. And there you go, you've got some text on your map. You can make that bold or not. Adjust the size. I believe some of the fonts don't work properly with the bold option, some do. This alpha is more of a transparency option. Alright, so that's your lines and text tools. Most of the tools in Dungeon Painter Studio are very easy to pick up and very straightforward. It's pretty simple, except for a couple things that I'll go over later in the video. Alright, then you've got your tokens, which is just some adventure tokens, or adventurer tokens and monster tokens that they've added in. I like to use these to help with scale as I'm designing a map. So I'll put an adventure or two kind of in a room, and I'll remove them before I export the map, but just so I've got a sense of how big the room or area I want is compared to the adventurers that would be there. Templates isn't used a lot, except for the few instances where I've taken a pre-existing map that was in black and white, or maybe from a classic module, and sort of use them as a tracing guide to create a full color updated version of the map using Dungeon Painter Studio. But this is where you would use you could save one of your maps as a template and put it in here, and you can use it as part of a bigger map. Alright. So those are the primary tools that we would use. You notice the bottom is very contextual based on which thing you're looking for, or which tool you're using. So in your objects tool, we have various different categories of objects. We'll see most of these are the default that come with Dungeon Painter Studio: Dragonville, Fairy Valley, Grim and Inky. In fact, The only one that here on my screen that's not a default is this one that I named custom. You can go in here and you can find your different objects. Each of these categories has their own subcategories, depending on what style of map you're looking for. And that's the same with ground textures. You've got the same groups, and each of those has their own subgroups with various different art and textures that you can put in here. All of the ones that come with it do come with a commercial license, so if you want to make and sell maps using the assets this comes with, you can do that. Pyromancers has stated multiple times within the Steam forums that all the assets that come with this are commercially licensed for you to use however you like. Alright, so then some of our more interesting parts of what Dungeon Painter Studio can do come into play over here on the right hand side. So you've got your layers, so every single thing on the screen, whether it's an object, a wall, some text, or ground, shows up as a different thing within the layer, and everything has its own edit button. So what we can do here is, let's say we want to take this puddle and the ground behind it. I'm going to doing a control click to select both, and I'm going to scroll down to see where they are, and I will group them. And I'm going to take them and move them to the top. I'm just going to zoom out and move them over here so it's not too cluttered. So we can see what we're doing. So as you can see, you can move stuff from the bottom to the top with these handy little buttons, or you can drag your items just like so many other tools with layers in them. And now we can go into a group, and you can see the hierarchy of the group here. So I could even group these a second time, and then you've got a group within a group. You can make your items visible or not visible. It's pretty handy when you're building a map with multiple floors. You can set floors over top of each other and make them visible or invisible as needed. So I like that tool's there. Hopefully they implement it in Dungeon Painter Studio 2. That one hasn't had an update in a while. Alright, so let's go into this. I'm gonna take this group that I made within this group and ungroup it, because there's no real need for that. Another important, or rather useful thing you can do here is double click and give your own name to the item. I find it very helpful to name each thing as I'm going, so that I know what things are supposed to be for what I'm trying to build, rather than have a billion things that say barrel A, B, C, 3. So, alright, let's go back into that. Now, the one thing Dungeon Painter Studio does that some of the other map tools don't do to the effect I'd like is have these effects. I'm going to take this puddle, and you can apply, these are the default settings for effects. Apply a long shadow to really sharp drop shadow, middle or short shadow, which is different varying degrees of shadow, bevel, give it a yellow glow or an orange light. You can only apply one of these effects to this item at a time. To get rid of the effect you applied, you can do clear layers. What's interesting here is, let's say I apply this long shadow, and then I go back to layers, and I go to root. I can then take, you can see here that the long shadow is applied to this puddle. I can go up one level, select this group, go back into this, and apply long shadows again, and it actually kind of double applies it. Don't see a big difference here, but sometimes if you have, here's a better way. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to send it into a group. So you can see it's got a long shadow here. I'm going to go one level above and apply the effect again. You can see the shadow got even darker. So you can actually apply the effects at multiple levels. I'm going to remove the layer there though. I'm going to go back out here, effects, and clear that layer. Go back into my group, go to my puddle, ungroup the puddle. I only created that group to show that how you can double stack effects to get different effects in different combinations. The other thing you can do with effects is you can actually go in and you can create your own preset effect. Let's call this one cool new effect. You can edit any of these pre-existing effects or create your own. Go into edit, you can actually add a drop shadow or a bevel, and you can add as many of these as you want and change their settings. You won't see any effect changing because this cool new effect is not applied. So now I've applied it to this, I can change the tint, give it a kind of a murky color. I can turn this, I can create a bevel, kind of an odd choice for a puddle, but really good for other things, like creating the sort of a height effect. Let's say I wanted this to be like a raised platform. Can readjust the settings for these. Drop shadows. You can get in here and you can create all kinds of different combinations to create your own effects and then apply them to any items within your layers you want. I feel like the drop shadows that you create with this are more distinct and visually pleasing than the ones that are created with, say, Dungeon Draft, which has its own advantages and is a very cool tool in and of itself. This is the ability to manipulate these layers, and this effects tool, which, sure, you can create these effects in probably Photoshop or GIMP or any of these other post-processing visual tools, but it's nice that these effects are built right into Dungeon Painter Studio. And then you have your backing grid, which are these guidelines. You can affect how transparent they are. Visible, very bold. You do hexagons, dots, lines. I almost always use boxes and just leave it at the default transparency. That's because I've mostly played D&D 5e. Most of the guidelines in that are either theater of mind or square based. You can change the color of the guides. the overall background color. Ooh, that's bright. Let's get a more distinct color line there. You can kind of adjust the vertical and horizontal position of the lines a little bit. You've got your zoom in and out up here. Interesting note, when you zoom in and out, let's say I have part of my map and it goes past on the right hand side here. If I export this, it'll cut this off at this line. So I'm zoomed out as far as you can. Your workspace in Dungeon Painter Studio is the extent of this darker workspace on the left. If it extends beyond that, it doesn't export. Alright. So you grab things and group them, make them invisible or visible. You manipulate groups the same way as you can do individual items. All of these selections also have hotkey options, though I find they don't always work the best, and I often find it not super useful for any of the hotkeys except maybe the edit one. So I've pretty much covered the effects, backgrounds, layers, the lock to grid, group, bottom, top, copy, paste, cut. And you can copy and paste into a group or paste outside of a group. Right, and then at the bottom here, we have a search. Do search for bed, which is not working because we are in the ground tools most recently. So I think we have to go object, and then if you do bed search, it'll find all the beds. So this can be set to case sensitive. Probably not super useful to do that unless you have some custom items that you know you want to look for that are just case sensitive. But you can see that this search box is context sensitive whether you're in the objects, walls, or the ground. This nice little palette tool will fill as you use the program. It will fill up with the items that you've used, or the walls that you've used, or the ground objects that you've used. So if you want to reuse something without doing too much searching to find it again. Alright. So that covers the individual tools. There are some other neat things here, such as, let's take this wall, and create this polygon. Then we can take this polygon, and there are some options here that are not immediately visible. If you right click it, you can go to the source tool, which will, at the bottom here, will pick the tool and I believe go into the category that this particular texture shows in. Or you can click add ground and it'll fill it with ground texture. You can insert an entire other map, which is inserting another saved DPS file or Dungeon Painter Studio file. Polywall to a group of walls. I believe that switches this wall and creates it turns it from a single polygon item into its own individual walls. Also, much like you can take a filled-in polygon wall and right-click to add ground, you can take a polygon floor, root, it's like this, and no, it's not a good. You have to go into this group, grab the floor, and you right-click and you can add wall. And it'll throw in a wall texture. When you added wall texture, it adds these control points which you can manipulate. This also works for fours and walls work pretty much the same way. When you click edit, you'll get dots for control to manipulate. You can right click to duplicate a point, and you can right click to remove a point. When you're all done, readjust the thickness, click OK when done, or press the Enter key on your keyboard. I know I'm not painting a beautiful map here, but I think it better illustrates the different things you can do with the tools. That add for option is really useful for when you draw these arcs, because it's really hard to fill this in with a 4 all on your own. So it's really nice that you can add ground there, and that ground perfectly fits within that arc. Alright, so we've done the adding ground, adding walls, editing objects and walls, talked about effects. I think there's one other thing I'd like to talk about. That is these union, subtraction, and subtraction options. So I'm going to multi-select, grab these two, group them, put them at the top just so I can go into that group so I know I'm only manipulating these two and not accidentally grabbing other items. Alright, so I'm going to overlay them a little bit. So if I take these two, select them both, and do a union, it's pretty simple. It creates one item from those two, creating that into one overall shape. Union's pretty simple. I'm gonna undo the union. The one that's a little throws me off a little more of these subtract options. So if you select this one on the left, then select the one on the right, and click this first subtract, you can see it cuts the shape out of the one on the left. Now if I undo that, so I've got both shapes. Now I'm going to select the one on the right and the one on the left, so I'm selecting them in the reverse order and selecting the same subtract option. This time, instead of taking a chunk out of the one on the left, took that chunk out of the one on the right. I'll overlay them, select the one on the left and the one on the right. I'm going to use this subtract. You can see that took the chunk out of the one on the right. Select this one and that one. You can see the subtract tools both work the same way. What they care about is which item you select first. and then which item you select second. I'm using a shift click to highlight both. You could also use your multi-select tool here. Yeah, so then that tool lets you create some unique shapes that would otherwise be hard to create. And I've apparently created a stone Pac-Man. Alright, I think that covers just about all of the things Dungeon Painter Studio can do with the default tools and assets. Part of the interface that did not cover these options up here. New is for new files. So you can always open a new Dungeon Painter Studio and just open a new worksheet, open existing ones. Dungeon Painter Studio saves in this .dps format. You can save your file. Here you can do add custom art to collection. This is where you would go if you have your own JPEGs and art stuff that you want to add. I don't have anything specifically set up, but I've played around with some stuff before. Created just some random custom objects, and that's where you would click this, find the file you want to add, click OK, click Add, and it would import the art. I always make sure I import it into this custom one anytime I'm playing with stuff. There we go. I did miss one option here, which is the objects brush. So if I wanted to grab this barrel, grab the objects brush, and then you can click and drag and brush with that object. Brush with random angle on. Change how frequently the object appears as you brush. Scale the size of the object as you brush. And the biggest difference here is the full brush is considered one item, as opposed to when you place an individual barrel. Individual barrel. Entire brush object. You can install mods. You'll find a lot of those in the Steam community, where people have uploaded tons of assets for you to use. Just be careful if you're doing commercial art not to use assets that are not properly licensed for you to resell. And then you've got two different export options here. You can export to PNG or JPEG. Background can be transparent. If you do not make it transparent, it will export with all these background lines. Almost always leave it transparent. I rarely have a need for these coordinates that it adds in. And I either do or do not show a grid. See, I misspoke there. This button is for showing this grid. I usually just leave transparent background on. And then you there's a little control point in the top and the bottom here. You can move this to manipulate what section of your map that you actually want to export. And you can see there's some presets for some various virtual tabletop tools. Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, D20 Battlegrounds, U-Realms, and then the just generic maximum. Maximum, you can see, puts your pixels per square at 200 pixels. That's the highest resolution you're going to get out of an export with Dungeon Painter Studio. Usually takes a long time to render that if your map's sizable. More often than not, it's fine to just stick with Roll20.net or Fantasy Grounds. Not sure which one would work better for Forge. I know that's a popular VTT tool. And then you just click create PNG or JPEG depending on what quality and file size you want to export to, and it will render that, and then you'll get a pop-up asking you where you want to save your file. And you save your file. You can also export to a PDF. PDF is going to ask you for a specific paper size. And then you'll see the cell size matching to the paper size. And you export your PDF. And I believe that covers pretty much everything Dungeon Painter Studio can do. And here's just a quick view of one map that I made in Dungeon Painter Studio. If you use your effects correctly, you can make things show as if they're underwater, on top of the water, a bit of a coastline, some kind of mountain ridges. Alright, and that about covers it. Another couple of quick tips that I almost forgot to add. If you've already switched to using Dungeon Painter Studio 2, you can still launch the original version 1 or Legacy Edition by clicking this Legacy version button that's here on the splash page or opening page for Dungeon Painter Studio 2. Another quick note is that before you open Dungeon Painter Studio, I would recommend that you empty your recycling bin. As you will see in a moment, as you're working with Dungeon Painter Studio, it is constantly creating backup files and dumping them in your recycling bin. I have found on numerous occasions that after this fills up enough, the tools in Dungeon Painter Studio will sometimes lag or freeze entirely. So it's a good idea to just do a quick empty recycle bin before launching the